Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of all key national and international issues as well. Today we're going to talk about the budget for the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the budget for the UT J&K for 2022-23 was passed by Lok Sabha on Monday. Education, home, public health, engineering and power and development saw the highest allocation for the UT in the next financial year. Responding to the discussion on this issue in the lower house, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that central government is committed to the development of J&K. She also informed the House that investor-friendly Jammu and Kashmir campaign has paid off well, with investment proposals worth 44,177 crore rupees received so far, with an employment potential of approximately 1.80 lakh jobs. Now, Finance Minister also said that investment proposals under the new industrial policy shall be cleared on a fast-track basis, and the power generation capacity is being doubled in the next 3 years also. In today's episode of Perspective, we will discuss and analyze all aspects of this budget for J&K, and we'll try and understand what is it where the focus areas are and what is it that needs to be done or, put more emphasis on in the coming months and years as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us in the studio Mr. Hasnain Masoodi. He's the JKNC Lok Sabha MP from the state. We also have Mr. Samsher Singh Manhas joining us, former BJP MP from J&K, and we also have Mr. Dipankar Sengupta, Professor of Economics in the University of Jammu. There. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. Let me begin with you, Professor Dipankar, and let's start by looking at more finer points of this budget documents. I did mention, certain aspects which was the investment, focus on power, education as well. But broadly, the budget, which is more than 1 lakh crore, where are the key focus areas?
Vishal, I think it's extremely important that when you look at the budget, there are two aspects that has to be looked at. Because, a budget was placed last year. In this budget, the finance minister also points out what happened during the course of the year. So, if you look at the revised estimates of the budget, given the fact that this is a very abnormal year, you had the second deadly wave of COVID as well as the third wave. In this financial year itself, there are certain things which were changed in the budget. What were they? You see, the government had thought its receipts would be something like 97,000 crore rupees. They fell short by 13,000 crore rupees. And it had to be made up by borrowing. But what is most heartening is the following. If you look at the capital expenditure component, that's the part that the government spends on infrastructure, that was targeted at 39,000 crores. It was ultimately, it will be 35,000 crores. And I think that's fantastic.
Okay.
Especially given the fact that when you look at most of the states have fallen behind in the capex expenditure this year. The honorable exceptions being UP, and now it seems it is Jammu and Kashmir as well. So that gives me hope, because you see, unless government puts in money in infrastructure, you will not have development, you will have nothing. Now, if you come to this year's budget, again, the key focus happens to be infrastructure. You have a total expenditure outlay of 1,11,000 crore rupees, of which capital expenditure is 41,000 crore rupees. And given the fact that this government was able to spend 35,000 crore rupees last year, there can be no credibility, there can be no doubting the credibility of this government to spend 40,000 crores this year as well. And this emphasis on government infrastructure is there in the union budget as well. Why is this emphasis on infrastructure? Because as I said earlier, unless you have roads, unless you have power, private industry will not come in.
Indeed.
You won't have external investment coming in. You won't even have domestic investment coming in. So whatever is your economic activity you want to boost, unless you have infrastructural support, that is not going to come in. And I'm happy that this budget has laid a very strong stress on capex. But apart from capex also, there are other very important issues in this budget which have been highlighted, which are extremely important. Now, the actual amount spent on those issues or on those heads may not be much, but they point to greater things, especially when it comes to tourism, promotion of aromatic plants, etc., etc.
Okay.
But I think when we discuss it further, I will talk about it.
We'll come to those aspects as well. But let's begin with capex and the focus on infrastructure as well. Mr. Hassan Masoodi is with us, the member of parliament from the state. Mr. Masoodi, there seems to be a thread there, vis-a-vis the union budget which was presented and the budget for the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir in terms of capex and the focus on infrastructure, which becomes really important, as Professor Dipankar was pointing out, when we are looking at the other aspect, that is bringing in more investments. And investments will only come in when the infrastructure is in place. Do you agree?
Well, I don't see same kind of focus on this capex in case of Jammu and Kashmir as we did witness in case of union budget.
Okay.
I mean, we have settled that ratio of it is 73 to 30. We have revenue expenditure is around 71,000 crore, and when, as rightly pointed out by Professor Dipankar, it is just 41,000. So I would expect a little more, because having regard to the difficult times Jammu and Kashmir has been in recent years. So in a row there were lockdowns and the business got affected. Then there is all of a sudden there is some kind of fillip was there for tourism, and I would expect something more than that, 41,000 crore rupees.
Okay.
So in my view, it is because of peculiar situation, most of the budgetary allocations are eaten up by security, home, and other end revenue expenditure.
Okay.
And though there is an increase everywhere across the board, right from agriculture to tourism to healthcare to wellness, health and wellness, and all other sectors, we do find there's an increase in capital expenditure. But I would expect something more than that.
Okay.
But all the same, it is okay. I mean, it is kind of a not bad, but a routine and okay budget.
Okay. So you're saying that, of course, the budget...
more focus on capital expenditure.
Okay.
So infrastructure building.
You would have expected more to be done on the capex and infrastructure part
right.
there as well.
That's right.
Of course, the more it is done, the less it seems when we're talking about developmental works. Of course, there is a lot of demand there, and we'll come back to that part as well with Professor Dipankar. But let me bring in, Mr. Manas here. Jamshedji, your view on the way the key focus areas have been highlighted vis-a-vis the budget for Jammu and Kashmir. Infrastructure, of course, there is one, Mr. Masoodi says a lot more could have been done, in terms of developmental works and other aspects.
First of all, when we see the Finance Minister presents the budget, 112 lakh crore rupees, 41,000 crore more than last year. But when we see the whole process, the different ways of the life, so all the factors, all the wings have some duties. Just like a farmers, just like a education sector, just like a business, more business focus on the J&K, or employment also an important factor.
Ji.
All these factors mainly focus on this budget. When we see all these factors, Masoodi says something. What I ask of Masoodi, where are you? You can rule the state more than 50 years. What? No. What is your time? What do you say to the public? What do you do for public? You do nothing. Do your own puppets. It's just we can so easily say something that just like just BDC members hai. Just like education sector में 1,303 crore rupees, for only education.
Okay.
So where we stand?
No, मना
Just
साहब,
like,
मना साहब जो मसूदी जी जो बात कह रहे हैं और जो दीपांकर जी ने जिस तरह से आकलन किया, उसमें एक चीज जो निकल के सामने आ रही है वो ये है कि इस बजट में फोकस इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर तो है, लेकिन मसूदी जी का ये कहना है कि शायद और थोड़ा सा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे और केपेक्स पे अगर फोकस होता तो जो डेवलपमेंटल प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं उन पे और पैसा खर्च किया जा सकता था। आपको लगता है कि ये जो बजट जिस तरह से प्रेजेंट किया गया है, जो जितना पैसा एलोकेट किया गया है, वो J&K की जो जरूरतें हैं खासतौर पे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर से संबंधित, उनको पूरा करने के लिए काफी है?
मैं कहता हूं ये सफिशिएंट है। हम लास्ट ईयर में जो हमें बजट मिला था, यानी कि 1,07,000 करोड़ रुपए था, हम पूरा यानी कि उसको डेवलप नहीं लगा पाए
जी।
सब यानी कि ब्यूरोक्रेट्स की वजह से, सब यानी कि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की वजह से। आज अगर पूरे का हम लगा पाए 1,12,000 करोड़ रुपया, तो जम्मू कश्मीर के लिए सफिशिएंट होगा। और बाकी स्टेट्स में अगर देखें तो वेयर द स्टेट्स आर स्टैंड, लेकिन हम ऑल डिपेंड ऑन सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट।
ओके।
और सारे के सारे उसी पर निर्भर है, सारा उसी पे करते हैं। तो इसलिए जैसे एम्प्लॉयमेंट को मेन फोकस रखा गया है इसमें। एम्प्लॉयमेंट जस्ट लाइक इंडस्ट्रियल एरिया, बिजनेस सेक्टर, मोर देन यानी कि ज्यादा से ज्यादा वहां पे एम्प्लॉयमेंट मिले
ओके।
यहाँ से पब्लिक को। और खासकर डेवलपमेंट वर्क्स थ्रू आउट द स्टेट अगर आकर कोई भी देखे और देखकर उसको सारी बातें देखने के बाद पता चलेगा कि जहां पे किस प्रकार की प्रोग्रेस हो रही है। मैं सोचता हूं कि पिछले 3 साल से यानी कि पहले अगर देखा जाए और अभी 3 साल का यानी कि ये सारा देखा जाए तो किस प्रकार का यहाँ पे फोकस हो रहा है। कहने के लिए मसूदी साहब कहते हैं और कुछ होना चाहिए, इससे ज्यादा और क्या हो सकता है कि 41,000 करोड़ रुपया हमने एक्स्ट्रा यानी कि इस बार मिला है। क्या हम पूरा खर्च कर पाए? तो ये जम्मू कश्मीर पूरे का पूरा यूटी जो है वो अच्छी तरह यानी कि डेवलप हो सकता है हर तरीके से। इसलिए बहुत सारे सेक्टर्स ऐसे हैं जो अछूते रह गए। मैंने किसानों का सेक्टर इसलिए कहा आपको कि पहले बिल्कुल अछूता था, टोटली इग्नोर किया गया था। और दूसरा एजुकेशन सेक्टर, जहां एजुकेशन पॉलिसी नहीं थी। सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट में तो पॉलिसी थी, जहां पॉलिसी नहीं थी। और सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने पिछले 2 वर्षों में ये पॉलिसी को लागू करके जहां पे खासकर नौजवानों को एजुकेशन कैसे दी जाए, तो इसलिए उसके लिए यानी कि बजट रखा हुआ है। तो बाकी तो अलग अलग देखा जाए तो कई प्रकार के हैं कि 13-14 यानी कि सेक्टर्स अलग अलग बनते हैं, जहां पे जिसके लिए हर एक के लिए अलग अलग फोकस किया गया है इस बजट का। तो 1,12,000 करोड़ रुपया कम नहीं होता।
जी बिल्कुल। I'll bring in Professor Dipankar on that part as well. When we look at the previous budget and this year's budget as well, and you're also mentioning the REs, that is revised estimates as well, in terms of how much is sufficient, what needs to be spent. But in terms of focus areas, if we come back to what you were earlier pointing to, looks like Mr. Manhas is also referring to certain other sectors. Tourism one, education the other, agriculture another one, and perhaps the other aspects which are interrelated are of course power sector is really important there.
Yes, please. You see, one thing, Jammu Kashmir has always been very well funded, and the amount of capital expenditure for Jammu Kashmir has always been very high, especially for compared to Himachal Pradesh. The problem is the following: that if you look at the strength of the private sector in Jammu Kashmir as opposed to Himachal, it has always been very low. State government budgets in this fiscal year is about 55% of the total GSDP, which tells you how dependent the state's economy is on government expenditure. And in that government expenditure of 1,11,000 crore rupees, 68,000 crore rupees is central government granted aid. This has to change. The state has to become more self-sufficient. And here, the quality of capital expenditure, the quality of spending is extremely important. If you look at Himachal, why Himachal? Because it's a neighboring state. It's also a hilly state with all the disadvantages of Jammu and Kashmir. Spread of roadways in Himachal is very good. Power situation is very good. And as a result of which, Himachal gets a lot of industry. It also gets a lot of tourists. Now, let me come back to those items in the budget that are required, which I'll highlight, which will push both growth as well as employment. You know that in this budget, there is a call for developing 75 tourism circuits as part of the 75th year of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. I think this is a very welcome step. And why tourism? You know, people know Jammu and Kashmir for tourism, but tourism has a particular property that it is the most employment generating of all industries that you can think of.
Okay.
It generates both low skilled labor demand, medium skilled labor demand, and high skilled labor demand. It generates a lot of income. And
Okay.
then the second thing, and you know, Jammu Kashmir, unfortunately or fortunately, is only known for valley tourism. There are places in Jammu which are as beautiful as the valleys, certainly as beautiful as Himachal Pradesh.
Okay.
You know, there are places like Bhadrawa, places like Kishtwar, places like in Kathua, in Punch, in Rajouri. They are so remarkably beautiful that people unfortunately don't know of it. If they knew of it, they would throng to these places as they throng to Himachal Pradesh.
Okay.
And I'm happy the government is now thinking of plans to build them up, build these circuits up.
Okay.
Now, it requires roads, it also requires special infrastructure. Then, when it comes to agriculture, the government is now pushing high density orcharding. You know, in horticulture, apple is a very important crop in the valley. Unfortunately, productivity levels of apple per hectare are very, very low.
Okay.
And that is why the government is giving a lot of thrust to high intensive orcharding so that, you know, yields can be doubled, trebled. It is also giving a lot of stress on farm logistics, especially controlled temperature storages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if apple productivity in Jammu Kashmir approaches international standards, then the size of the horticultural sector will multiply 4 times.
Okay.
4 times. It will become a 40,000 crore rupee industry.
Indeed.
Look at that particular figure. So the amount of incomes generated, the amount of employment generated, again, it will be massively high.
Okay.
And then they're talking about aromatic plants. You know, the budget talks about helping aromatic plants, etc., etc.
Okay.
There is a startup culture that has started in the state. What we need to do is to ensure, to create conditions so that the startups become full-fledged industries.
Okay.
Now, for that, you need roadways.
Okay.
For that, as you pointed out,
Indeed,
we need
indeed.
to set
Infrastructure
our power
infrastructure will
sector
be
in
needed.
order.
You're right, Professor Dipankar
Yeah.
there. You know, I'd like to take these 2 points to, Mr. Masoodi here as well. You know, as both the gentlemen are referring to, of course, education is important. But then in terms of employment generation, tourism is one sector. And with respect to, Jammu and Kashmir, it becomes really important
Really
as well.
important, yes.
And agriculture as well, you know, varied farming activities also. So, in your opinion, how do you think it can be done better?
Now, let us have a closer look at the budget, the allocations. You know, agriculture, rural sectors, power sector, PHE get a fair deal in infrastructure building. But surprisingly and shockingly, tourism doesn't get that kind of treatment. It is just 604 crore rupees, as against 9289 for PHE. See, if you expect and you act, as a matter of fact, we have more than 1 million tourists visiting Kashmir, Jammu as well, pilgrimage tourism and other tourism. But we don't have this infrastructure to make their stay comfortable, to extend all the comforts that are expected to be who come on a pleasure trip.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, I am not a party. Mr. Manas says, and I don't focus on that. So, in my opinion, tourism deserved a better deal, not mere 604 crore rupees. That is what I understand. That is what is the allocation.
Okay.
On infrastructure building, I mean, see capital expenditure. It deserved much more so that we could make room for, you know, there are at least 500,000 e-visas proposed to be issued this year. And most of the visitors we have, tourists we have from other countries, as they used to come to flock to Kashmir,
Okay.
I expect that a good number of them will come to Kashmir. But surprisingly, we have only 2 5-star hotels, one in Gulmarg and one in Pahalgam. You will be surprised to know that this year they charged tariff was 52,000 rupees. Nowhere in India like that. I don't know, not to my knowledge, I don't know what experienced Professor Saab has. But we have to focus more on infrastructure building in case of tourism.
Okay.
And sir, then we don't have that much expenditure in social sector. When you go for an analysis, social sector, because of peculiar circumstances, also deserve much more attention.
Okay.
So send tribal, because we have at least 2 million tribals.
Okay.
So that also deserves much more.
Okay, let me take this to Manas साहब as well. Manas साहब, क्या आप सहमत हैं इस बात से? आपको लगता है कि टूरिज्म सेक्टर पर और थोड़ा सा फोकस करने की जरूरत है? हम बजट की बात जरूर कर रहे हैं, लेकिन बजट के जो फोकस एरियाज हैं, और खासतौर पे अगर जम्मू कश्मीर के लिहाज से देखें तो टूरिज्म इंडस्ट्री जो है वो, जैसे प्रोफेसर दीपांकर कह रहे थे, एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन की खान है।
ये सत्य है कि दीपांकर जी ने जिस प्रकार कहा है, केवल कश्मीर को ही यानी कि टूरिज्म के साथ जोड़ा जाए, ये यानी कि लगता नहीं है। मैं कहता हूँ कश्मीर और जम्मू एक है।
जी बिल्कुल।
लेकिन जम्मू यानी कि प्रोविंस में भी बहुत सारे स्थान ऐसे हैं, जैसे यानी कि उधमपुर है, कठुआ है, पुंछ है, राजौरी है। वहां पे बहुत सारी चीजें अच्छी हो सकती हैं टूरिज्म की दृष्टि से, लेकिन आज तक यानी कि टोटल उसको यानी कि अलग से रखा गया है। अगर इसमें लगाया जाए तो बहुत सारी यानी कि एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी जनरेट हो सकती है, और हम यानी कि अर्निंग सोर्स भी हमारा बन सकता है। दूसरा मैं कहूंगा कि जिस प्रकार हेल्थ सेक्टर को लेकर यानी कि लिया गया है, हेल्थ सेक्टर को जितना बढ़ावा इस पिछले 3 वर्षों में मिला है, इतना पहले कभी नहीं मिला होगा। क्योंकि आज हम कह सकते हैं कि जैसे 20 के लगभग यानी कि डिस्ट्रिक्ट हेडक्वार्टर पर हॉस्पिटल हैं, और हॉस्पिटल यानी कि जो चलने लायक है। नहीं तो एक ही हॉस्पिटल यानी कि एसएमजी से जम्मू होता था, वो भी छोटा सा, और श्रीनगर में, कश्मीर में एक ही बहुत बड़ा था, सोरा का इंस्टीट्यूट, जस्ट लाइक ए पीजीआई चंडीगढ़ के मुताबिक। तो इसलिए हेल्थ सेक्टर को बढ़ावा देने के लिए, और तीसरा हम इन्वेस्टर को हम कन्विंस कर सकते हैं जम्मू में आकर इन्वेस्ट करें, इंडस्ट्री को बढ़ावा दें, जिससे हमारी एम्प्लॉयमेंट, यानी कि उन्होंने कहा है कि कम से कम 21,000 लोग तो यानी कि तुरंत भर्ती किए जाएं पिछले 2 और 3 मंथ्स। हम कहता हूँ स्किल्ड लेबर जो चाहिए, हमें आज तक अनस्किल्ड लेबर को माना जाता था जम्मू में, तो हम स्किल्ड लेबर तैयार हो रही है। जिस प्रकार का प्राइम मिनिस्टर की एक प्लानिंग थी कि स्किल्ड कैसे किया जाए, तो उसके माध्यम से भी यानी कि लोगों को यानी कि उसे बढ़ावा मिलेगा। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे सेक्टर ऐसे हैं, मैंने जैसे कहा किसानों का है, बाकी सेक्टर हैं, उन पर बढ़ावा मिला है। मसूदी साहब ने ये कहा ठीक है कि टूरिज्म को और यानी कि पैसा मिलता, तो मैं कहता हूँ बहुत सारा इसी में भी यानी कि सारा एडजस्ट हो सकता है। जो बजट मिला है, इस बजट में बहुत सारी चीजें ऐसी, जैसे राजस्व यानी कि 71,000 करोड़, 71,000 करोड़ के लगभग 71,000 करोड़ है जी। तो उससे में यानी कि थोड़ी बहुत कटौती हो सकती है, जिससे हम इस सेक्टर को और बढ़ावा दे सकते हैं जी। आज तक टूरिज्म का जितना पैसा लगता रहा है, मैक्सिमम पैसा यानी कि 99% पैसा जो है वो कश्मीर में लगा है, जम्मू में पैसा नहीं लगा। अगर जम्मू में भी यानी कि उसका ध्यान दिया होता, तो जहां भी एम्प्लॉयमेंट बहुत ज्यादा बड़ी होती है, टूरिज्म सेक्टर बहुत बड़ा हुआ। दीपांकर जी ठीक कह रहे थे, छोटे छोटे यानी कि उन्होंने जिलों के बारे में बताया, छोटे तहसीलों में बताया, जहाँ पे अच्छे यानी कि हमारे पास होते हैं, जहाँ पे कठुआ यानी कि बेस को लीगल लाया जाता है। कठुआ में बहुत सारे बढ़िया, और उधमपुर में बहुत सारे बढ़िया टूरिज्म का जगह दिखाया जा सकता है। पत्नीटॉप को यानी कि माना जाता है, लेकिन उसको डेवलप उस प्रकार से नहीं किया गया। केवल को कहते हैं 2 होटल यानी कि कश्मीर में बनाए गए हैं, क्यों नहीं बनाए, जम्मू में क्यों नहीं हो सकते थे?
Indeed, you know, it has to be proportionate development in both areas there as well. Quick concluding comment from you, Professor Dipakar. We are running short of time, but in 60 seconds, if you could sum it up for us.
You see, what is important is not the size of the investment when it comes to tourism, but it's the quality of spending.
Okay.
You see, much of the investment that is required in tourism after the roads have been built and the proper infrastructure set up will be private investment.
Okay.
It is the private sector which will set up its hotels. It is the private sector which will generate much of the activities that are required to attract tourism. What the government needs to do is basically to invite private sectors to these particular places after setting up communications, and do road shows in the rest of the country so as to tell people, look, apart from the valley, there are also other very beautiful places that you can visit.
Indeed.
And
that you're right there, Professor Dipakar. Provide the industry and enabling ecosystem out there in the Union Territory. It's not just about tourism. It's about the other aspects of development as well. The investment which the Finance Minister was referring to. I'm afraid we're running short of time, but we will continue this discussion on some other day. We'll talk about the beauty of Jammu and Kashmir and how it can be further enhanced. Thank you so much, Professor Dipakar, Mr. Shamsher Singh Manhas, and Mr. Hassan Masoodi as well for sharing your views and insight as our panelists were pointing out vis-a-vis the budget allocation for Jammu and Kashmir. There are various areas which need to be focused upon, and a lot of money being allocated out there. But the key lies in ensuring that an ecosystem, an enabling ecosystem is put in place for more investments, for more private sector investments there in various fields, which will then further spur the employment opportunities and the growth in the state as well. We'll come back again with a different aspect and a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.